Does it matter which one we do first? Okay, Elizabeth, could you do the planning commission and do a roll call? And remember to announce what city and state you're appearing from in this remote meeting, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
the clerk is prepared to do both roll calls.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, clerk.
Okay. Mayor Whipple,
Here, Mason, Michigan.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown,
Present, Mason, Michigan.
Councilmember Clark, Councilmember Clark,
Can't hear
can't
you.
hear you. I'll loop back to that. Councilmember Joshua,
Here from Mason, Michigan.
Councilmember Ferris,
Here, Mason, Michigan.
Councilmember Schaefer,
Here, Mason.
Councilmember Vogel,
Here from Mason, Michigan.
Councilmember Clark, can you talk yet? Councilmember Clark, Commissioner Barna,
Here from Mason, Michigan.
Commissioner Howe,
Here, Mason, Michigan.
Commissioner Husby,
Here, Mason, Michigan.
Commissioner, and is it Perot?
Here, Mason, Michigan.
Commissioner Sabaton,
Live from Mason.
Commissioner Shadid, I believe is absent. Commissioner Waxman
Here from Mason, Michigan.
and Commissioner Wren, I believe is absent as well right now. Councilmember Clark, looks like you logged.
I did suggest that he log off and try to log back.
Okay, okay. We have a quorum, so.
All right, so we have a quorum of both bodies. Next, we have public comment. We had no notice in advance of any public comment. I'm only seeing one name on the list that I don't recognize. Tommy De La Fuente. Is that someone from the public that wishes to speak?
Mr. Mayor, Tommy is our youth advisor for the Planning Commission.
All right, thank you very much. Tommy will be listening in as well. Because this is a workshop, if you do drop out and you come back in, it's no big deal. We're not gonna be making any decisions on anything tonight. It's just to get information. Since we don't have any public comment, we'll move on to the main purpose of this, and that is a presentation of the proposed capital improvement program for 2021 through 27 by Deborah Stewart, City Manager. I just wanted to preface all this with kind of what the gist of this is this is really phase 2, if you will, in the capital improvement process. The phase 1 is the staff coming up with a proposal, and they've come up with that proposal. And the process we've started to put into place the last few years is that the staff would then present that proposal jointly to the Planning Commission and City Council so that we would all see it at the same time. And if there were questions about the actual content of certain projects or, explanation needed about the scope and whatnot of a project, then we could all hear the answers at the same time, help speed things up. The next step would be the Planning Commission will have a public hearing on this and also act to either recommend it with changes. And then after that, it will go to the City Council, and the City Council will consider it and adopt it, or I guess we could choose not to, but we'll most likely to adopt it or adopt it with changes. The main reason I want to bring all that up is we're not here tonight to discuss priorities. We're not here tonight to debate what year something's in, because we're not going to make those decisions. This is the staff's proposal and the first time we've all seen it. And so this is a time to listen to Deb give her presentation. And if there are questions, I know she's going to stop along the way and provide an opportunity for people to ask questions if they have questions about the particulars of a project. But we're not, the purpose of this meeting is not to debate, why it's in this year and why it's not that year, or why is it this amount and why isn't it that amount. That can all come out in the next step when the Planning Commission meets to discuss what they would approve for the plan, and then the City Council will discuss what plan is actually approved. So with all that, I guess I'll turn it over to the city manager and let her kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to share my screen here and we'll see how that works. Can you see the presentation? Thumbs up. Okay. So I'm going to go through, and as I'm looking at the presentation, I can't see you guys fully. So if you have a question, I'm going to be breaking after each category. So if you have a question on streets, we can handle all of those at the same time. But I'm going to need you guys to speak up if we don't see you, because I can only see a few of you as I'm presenting. So I want to start by first thanking you all for participating tonight. I know not everyone gets excited about talking about asset management and capital improvement programs on a Thursday night. I get excited about this, but I know not everyone does. And I think it's one of those things where it's a really important part of what we do. And it really kind of sets the stage for how we move into budget and some other things. So I just appreciate you taking the time. So I wanted to talk about kind of what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over the process, where we're at in the process, our recommended projects, and then talk about feedback by area. And so to just be clear, the focus tonight is about clarifying questions. There may be questions you have that we cannot answer tonight. I do have our team on that they may be able to respond immediately, or we will follow up with you as all members if there's questions that we need to get more information on. Typos, we know they're in here. We've identified some already, and we appreciate those have already sent them. Just send those to me separately. We want it to be the best document, but we know every version we send out, we see something else. It's just a large document with a lot of people working on it. So if you see it, let us know. Okay, so when we talk about the process, I want to make sure we identify how the capital improvement plan fits in with everything that we do. And so we've developed this authorization flow chart, which I think is helpful to kind of set the framework. So our city charter is our constitution. This is something that can only be changed by a vote of the people. It's set, those are the things that we're really basing kind of that higher level of requirements from our city perspective. Then we have city ordinances that the Planning Commission definitely weighs in on, and the council develops, and those provide more laws that don't require a vote of the people. Then we have our master plan, which really sets the general vision for the community, and other specific plans under that plan that provide more specific vision. A great example is the Park and Rec plan that we just finished. So while the master plan talks generally about recreation, the Parks and Rec plan really focused in on the specific things we wanted to do with our parks. The capital improvement program is the next step. And so ideally, it would encompass goals of the master plan that then we're implementing by capital investment we're making. The step after the capital improvement plan is to actually work into a budget. So the capital improvement plan is really setting those priorities, and then the budget will define the actual funding allocation for them. And then there's even another step where council takes action to actually authorize that project to be implemented. So, you set the budget, and then the council actually has to award that bid or take that next action. And then finally, staff can implement the project. So you can see there's a lot of mechanisms that go into before the project can even be moving forward in a practical way. So when we talk about the CIP, we're talking about our guiding principles are prioritizing the use of limited funds. We only have so many dollars to go around. We really have to prioritize what has the biggest impact and really can make a change in the community that our citizens are expecting. So what the plan includes is construction of new facilities or additions that are over $5,000, non-reoccurring rehabilitation or any part of a building, its grounds or facilities over $5,000, equipment that's over $5,000, or a study that is $5,000 that is part of a CIP project. So when you think about the feasibility study for the library or something like that. It would be part of an actual capital project or a study that's completely independent of a CIP project. And an example of that is a new item that was added, which was a charter review. It's not tied to a capital item, but it's over 10,000 in value. So we make sure we include that as well. So when we talk about the capital improvement program, the first step we do is staff starts to develop projects. And we start doing that as early as October. And they really present any projects that would be new to the plan. A lot of those get fit into year 6, but sometimes something's been identified that needs to be put in at an earlier year, or they want to reprioritize something based on something. So the questions that we ask in that prioritization is, does the project contribute to health, safety, and welfare? So is this a health, safety, welfare issue? Does the project, is it required to comply with laws? A lot of our utility improvements are required to comply with laws. We have to do certain maintenance or requirements to keep those plants at a certain level. So a lot of that is law-driven versus priority-driven. Does the project conform with adopted programs, policies, or plans? This is where we want to lean on some of our plans. So when we look at the Park and Rec plan, you'll see our park section really leans on the park plan as far as the prioritization. What was prioritized in that plan, and then we plug it into the CIP. Will the project upgrade facilities or create new efficiencies? So these are the investments that we know maybe will provide a better service or allow staff to be more efficient long-term. So there may be cost up front, but there's going to be a cost savings long-term. And then what's the service area impacted? This is where we kind of have that gut check of, does this improvement really just help a few citizens? Is it just one street? Is it just one neighborhood? Or is it a full city improvement? That doesn't mean we don't do those projects that have a smaller impact, but they may not be as high priority as one that would have a citywide impact. So that's what that category kind of talks about. And then, does the project deliver a level of service desired by the community? This is one of those categories where, you know, we might not be doing it, but the community is telling us they want us to do it. And so we want to evaluate that and determine whether it is a priority. The challenge with that, as you can see, is that's the last question. These other items generally are a higher priority because legally we're required to do it. There's a health and safety issue and we need to do it, or we've already adopted a policy that requires us to do it. So those are all things that are going to be higher priority. So when we get into budget, which is a little bit different, and I think the CIP and budget can often get confused, is, you know, people want to know, well, what's going to fund this? Can we get grants for this? Or I would only like it if it was grants. I think the key that we're trying to get away from is if it's a priority project, it should be in the CIP and it should be prioritized. And of course, staff is going to do everything we can to get funding and grants for those projects, but we need to know how much of a priority it is for you. And when we get to budget, that's when we can have the tough conversation about, hey, you know, you prioritize 5 items. And when we look at our operations, we can't do all 5 of those and combined with our costs. So we need your help to determine which should get pushed off to the next year, or for you to say, hey, unless you get grant funds, we're not going to do that project. So that's more of a funding discussion, which is different than the capital improvement plan. Our goal is that we really try to set out a plan that allows for us to appropriately plan for replacement and upgrade of equipment. While we're prioritizing, there may be shifts. So for example, we may have a project that's in year 3, but all of a sudden the state comes out with a grant that would allow us to fund that project if we applied this year. That would be a discussion we would have of saying, hey, there's a funding opportunity, we could move that up. We have an example in our capital improvement plan this year. A corridor plan, we believe we're going to get funding for, so now it may move up to the current year. And so we want to see that 6-year vision because the state can come up with programs all the time. And if we have a project that's ready to go, we want to be able to move on it. We really don't want the plan to be, we want to focus on the plan from a prioritization perspective and only add emergencies that come up. We We don't want grants to drive why we're putting in a project. There's a difference between, there's a grant that's available for a project we planned in year 3, but if we apply this year, we'll be able to get it. So we want to apply and move that up, versus there's a grant available for a project we've never even contemplated, and we're going to create it. That's what we're trying to avoid. We really want the prioritization locally driven. And then if there's grant funding that we can seek, that's what we would do after the fact. So just a reminder of where we are in the CIP process. So we've done our internal project evaluation and prioritization. And so what that means generally is that our staff presents projects and we evaluate how we can make them work within the current CIP. So do things get shifted? Do they get moved? A lot of it has to do with capacity discussions. You know, we thought we could get all this accomplished last year, but we couldn't. So now we need to shift a couple things back or a couple things forward. And then we work to present a plan to both the Planning Commission and the council so that you hear it together. That's where we are tonight, where you're hearing the plan, addressing clarifying questions. We started last year doing an open house where we would invite people that had projects for the next 3 years in our street fund to come and talk about any issues they might have on their street. This year, we're not going to do that. It just doesn't allow for it in the same way, but we are, and we have reached out to the streets that are going to be impacted this year. We just aren't going further years out, and we're going to hopefully implement that again next year, where we talk about it at our open house in the fall as well in the spring, so that people aren't surprised that their project's coming up and they have a chance to weigh in on it. So the next step is staff to really provide clarification and corrections. So if you see anything, let us know. And then the Planning Commission will consider the plan, have a public hearing, and provide any recommendations to council, noting additional projects that maybe we didn't think about that they want to add and amend the plan, or a change in priorities. If you're saying you look at year 1 and you know what, this is not that high of a priority, we're recommending it move further back and something else move forward, that would be the appropriate time to have that discussion and actually make an amendment to the plan. And then that plan would be recommended to council, and then council does the same process. They evaluate and determine, is there anything that they would change? And then that really sets the roadmap for staff to incorporate into the budget. I want to be clear that not everything that's approved in the CIP will necessarily be in the recommended budget. When we start running the numbers of operational costs and things like that, we may come to council and say, you know, these 6 items, we can't afford to do them all. We want to have a discussion with you because you prioritize them in the CIP, but they're not feasible. And so what do you want to switch, or how do you want to react to that? Or do you want us to seek other revenue when it comes to grant funding or other things? How do you want us to handle that situation? We did our best in the presentation we provided to you of what we think we are able to afford, but that will be tweaked when we get into the operational budget process. So any questions on the process before we move into projects? Anybody?
City Manager?
Yeah.
Just one question on the streets. We talked about earlier this fall, in when you notify the residents of a street that their street's going to be worked on, are you notifying it from the property tax rolls for the people who actually own the property instead of the people who just live there?
So we learned from last year, Councilmember Schaefer, in the situation we had last year. And I know we did door hangs out there, but we also identified if there was a property that maybe didn't have an address on that street, but had an address on an adjacent street or a corner, that we notified them as well.
But that still doesn't cover everyone who might own property on that street. The particular instance I was talking about was when that person owned a garage but no house, and he didn't get notice of the street work. That's why I suggested that perhaps we use the property tax records to identify the real property owners of the parcels on the street.
We did pull, I believe, I'm gonna ask, Mike, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, I'm here.
can you go through the process? Because I know you compared with the tax assessment roll as well as doing the door hangs. Can you talk a little bit about how you notified them?
Yeah, Councilmember Schaefer, we did door hangs, but we were very conscious of what happened last year, and there was no properties of such that with the streets that we're doing. So we did look for ones that were either vacant and just had a structure on there, but not necessarily a house. That wasn't the case for any of the houses or any of the houses this year. We did, if the house was on a corner or might be affected, we did notify them. So anyone that might have had a garage on that street, but their address was on a different street, we did notify those people.
Okay, but
This really isn't a problem or for the CIP. I agree, Jerry's got a real issue here. I think he's talking partly about absentee landowners who might be landlords or something like that, but this isn't really something to be talked about as part of the CIP.
well, it'd just be a quick answer.
Well, I think you got the answer that we have so far. I don't think it's sufficient.
No, it's not. No.
So I don't want to debate it or go any further on it here. I think we need to get a better answer on exactly how we're going to make sure that every single property owner, not just residents, know that street work's being done.
Okay, I'll bring it up at the next council meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, so we're gonna move into current projects, and this is a new ad that we're adding to this discussion, partly because when we talk about going into the CIP, I think it's important. One of the things that's making me most concerned lately is our capacity to complete projects. We have a lot coming at us in a lot of different realms. You know, COVID-19 really created a lot of additional challenges and regulations. Our utilities have really, in the last 4 to 5 years, the regulations have increased significantly. And so the reason I wanted to talk about the current projects we're working on is so that you can know what projects that we anticipate going over into the next fiscal year, even though they're budgeted for this year and will be likely awarded this year, just so you have context of kind of where we are from a staffing perspective. So when we look at the current projects, a lot of these have been completed in streets. The one that was delayed was the signal evaluation at East Maple and South Jefferson. We wanted to do a traffic study before we changed out that signal. The challenge we had was traffic patterns had changed considerably when we were planning to do that study. And so we have a plan to do that coming up now that traffic has returned to a little bit more normal status. We also have delayed Temple Street pedestrian crossing. The school was a partner and is a partner in that project. They're still determining whether it's a priority for them in their capital expenses. And so that's one that we're still evaluating. Now, when we look at Leyland Park Phase 2, we stalled that last summer because of COVID, and now we're going to be evaluating that. That's likely going to cross over into the next fiscal year. We're going to be starting it this spring and into the summer. We also have the Columbia Street pedestrian bridge design crossing. This is the existing bridge, adding a walkway and getting approval from MDOT to add a walkway onto the existing bridge and figure out how we can get access to that bridge in a way that MDOT would approve. Obviously, that's going to take some time, and that had been put on hold. And then the Rainer Park Master Plan, we're working on that, but we anticipate that's going to take some time to complete this summer. And then the biggest heavy lift that we have coming up is our master plan and zoning update. While we plan to award the contract this year, and that's the joint workshop we're hoping to have with City Council and Planning Commission to really make sure we're all on the same page on what we hope to accomplish. We know that significant amount of that work is going to happen in next fiscal year. And that's going to be a heavy lift for all of our staff because they're all going to be actively involved in that process. Then we also have our DPW design. We anticipate a contract award this early summer, but that design work is going to go into the next fiscal year. So I'm just giving that as a context of even the current fiscal year is likely going to have some heavy lifts that go over into the following year. So now we get into recommended projects. So the first thing I want to do is just explain to you, for those that are not familiar with our CIP document, kind of how we organize it and what the coding means. So when we look at the coding for a project, an example is 2021 MVP 1. What this means is the first date, the year, is the year that the project was added to the plan. So if you look at the project numbers, you can very easily see if something was added in 2021 at, in this current year or in the next year. And the goal is there is to really show you if there was a project we didn't really anticipate that came up, and that's something that hasn't been in the plan for the last 6 years, or to also show you that you've seen this project for 5 years. This shouldn't be new information to you. Now it's just about prioritizing it. The next area is the area or that project falls under. MVP is motor vehicle pool, but we have parks, we have building, all of those are the category, and then the project number for that project. So today what we're going to go over is all the proposed projects for the next fiscal year. Those are the most important because those are going to hit the budget, and we're going to have to make decisions this current year on whether we move forward with them. The next thing we're going to discuss is new and moved projects in the next 2 years. The reason why we're emphasizing just the next 2 years is the next 2 years go into our multi-year budget. We budget out 3 years. We estimate the second and third year. It helps us give us the trends of how we're doing from a revenue and expenditure perspective. We are not going to spend any time on years 4 through 6. If you have questions about that or clarifications, we're happy to have that, but that's really just a forecast of what we envision our projects we need to do, but we're really emphasizing these first 3 years. Okay, so we're going to start with streets. So streets, obviously streets, bridges, and signals, they hit our master plan goals regarding transportation network throughout the city. We also have a regulatory requirement in our charter to spend or to allocate amount that's equal to 4 mills. And that's something that in the CIP, we track for you how we're complying with that and how we're where we're evaluating what the required appropriation is and what we actually spent in that year. So when we talk streets, bridges, and signals, we don't really have a lot that has moved in these areas. We made some movement for those of you that have been involved in the CIP plan. I think about 2 years ago, we moved quite a bit around and we really matched up with our utility work. So our streets are in a pretty good order right now of how we anticipate moving forward. The only change is the one that I mentioned, which is the signal at Maple and Jefferson. While we think we can get the traffic study done this year, when we talk about the parts that would be needed to replace that signal, it's likely not going to happen until next fiscal year. Now, there is a good chance that it may not require the same replacement signal once the traffic evaluation is done. This is our worst case scenario of what we believe it would cost. So these streets, as I noted, have not changed. I'm going to try to get to the map so that you can see them a little more visually of where they are. So the orange is this summer is the projects we're going to be working on. And then the green is next year. And then blue is the following year. So as you can see, we have a lot of work, a large project in 2022. There's a lot of utility work associated with that. And so that's why you don't see a lot of other street work there, because we have a lot to do in that year. Is there any questions about the streets or the prioritization or how they're fluctuating as far as year to year?
I have a question. This is John.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to just question the Columbia Street Bridge.
Yeah.
So I that was brought up in 2020, and it says anticipated start date of spring 2021. Do you see any impact with MDOT and the reconstruction of that, or is that the reason why it's still in here? Are they going to fix that bridge this summer?
I believe they're planning to fix it this summer. I don't know if Mike knows more about that than Mike. Do you have any update on that?
They haven't updated me since the last time we communicated before the end of the last calendar year, but they're looking April, May to have it completed. The reason being is they have to replace one of the beams, and it's not like it's a shelf-ready beam, so it has to be
Right.
made and then shipped over. They were able to straighten out the second beam, but essentially they're waiting on the other beam to be
Oh, so,
fabricated.
okay, thank you. So it's not going to be a total bridge replacement. They're going to be able to repair it and fix it.
They are just doing the repair, and that is it.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I want to be clear on the expectations of the Columbia State Bridge. We had a really productive conversation with some of the staff at MDOT. We explained some of our challenges and how costly it would be to do a pedestrian bridge in this area. And the staff at the table at the time were willing to consider adding one sidewalk on one side of the bridge if it was a protected sidewalk. And we can't add any weight. We just have to use what's there. But some of the challenges are the access up to that bridge, and they need to make sure that all of that is justified. Now, we know people change at MDOT. We know their rules change at MDOT. And so our goal is to hopefully get a design this spring that they would authorize, that we could move forward with, so that we get that concrete from them, that approval. But we know a lot can change with MDOT. They're very concerned about this bridge and the capacity that it has.
Thank you.
Are there any other, before we move on, any more questions with streets? Okay. We're going to move on to utilities. This includes sanitary, storm, and water. And so these items are the ones that we talked about that are most likely tied to a regulatory requirement. We have permits that are in place that have certain requirements that we have to meet and certain maintenance that we have to do. Also driving a lot of new regulations, the things that we weren't dealing with even 3-4 years ago. One of those is our lead service line replacement. And so in the capital improvement plan, we have added a summary of that replacement requirements, where we currently stand on that replacement schedule. And we have to continue to invest in that in order to meet the requirements of EGLE. So when we look at utilities, some of the things that we've identified are things that you have seen before, like the replacing the hydrants at the Mason Plaza. That was something that you've seen on the plan for a while. This is a relocation of hydrants that are really close to the building to make it safer, and they are outdated, so some of the parts are more challenging. And then we also have well number 5 rebuild. You're going to see rebuild of wells throughout the plan because we're trying to get on a regular schedule of those so that we're maintaining them appropriately. And then we have the wastewater treatment plant design. This is an item that you've seen for a while, but we split it up this year to more accurately define where the money is going to be spent and in what years. And so we know majority of the next fiscal year is going to be spent in design work. And then we anticipate construction starting potentially as early as next spring. Construction starting as early as next summer, but it would likely hit the following fiscal year. And so we know that we're going to be spending most of our money this year on design. And that design funding is not going to be requiring us to bond out for that. So we can spend that now without utilizing some of the LDFA money and move forward with that design without the full bonding of that project. So then we also have 2 new items, and these new items have a lot to do with redundancies and making sure that we can maintain the plant. These were things that were identified by our new DPW director, just evaluating the plant and making sure that these things are maintained at a level so that we can do the maintenance required to shut off certain valves and things like that in order to do the work. So when we talk about the wastewater treatment plant, we keep these pictures in here because we know this is what happens when it rains. And these are things that from a permit perspective, we have to address, and we need to move forward and continue to do things to improve the system, to make, to reduce infiltration into the system, but also that you can see some of our areas are just deteriorating. The plant is outside of its lifespan, and these are things that we need to fix, and we have a plan to do that. So this is the plan. As many of you know, we did a feasibility study and a layout of the site to ensure that we could meet the requirements. We do think that there may be some tweaks because Eagle has already adjusted some of their requirements when it comes to floodplains, but we do have enough room on this site to make some adjustments and still meet their needs. So there may be some tweaks to this, but it kind of gives you a concept of how the site will be laid out. So the next items are in year 2. And this is what we discussed about matching the utilities with the street work. And so Cherry Street and Barn Street, those are ones that have large utility work that we need to do. And then again, this regular rotation of well rebuilds, and then the wastewater treatment plant construction. This is the project we split into design and construction. And then we also moved the wastewater solids handling system construction to match with the same time as the construction of the plant. That originally was not evaluated as part of the feasibility study, but we now have done a study, and I know we're working through that process so that we can determine what would be the right result for the construction of that as well. So when we get into the 3rd year, again, some of these items are just regular maintenance and things that we need to do in order to maintain the level of quality of water and things like that that we have. There is a new well on here for Franklin Farms. We did move this out. It was originally, I believe, in year 2, but we moved it out because we wanted to even out the utility fund, and we believed we could push it out a year. The utility fund is one of those that is a fine balance, and it gets more into the budget question, but we knew we had to space out some of these larger projects. You do see a new project at the bottom here, and that is because we don't add utilities to the street work until the 3rd year. There's a cost and evaluation of what it's gonna to get those estimates, and we want the estimates to be as accurate as possible. So we, if you look in the CIP, have noted that utilities under streets are only added in years 1, 2, and 3. Any questions on utilities before we move on to parks?
City manager?
Yes.
Just a quick question. I'm hoping that $2 million for the design of the wastewater treatment plant is just a placeholder. Is it expected to cost $2 million to design that plant?
To do design and engineering, that is the estimate we anticipate. It's going to be in that range.
Okay, thank you.
That will, to confirm, that will all be bid out and evaluated. And obviously we hope it comes in less, but we wanted to have, that was an item that we received feedback that was a range we should consider. Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to move forward with park, cemetery, forestry, and non-motorized. So if you remember, we recently completed a parks and recreation and non-motorized plan that really had goals of sustaining the existing facilities and bringing them all into a good state of good repair within 10 years through renovation or replacement. And then ensuring that 100% of our neighborhoods have non-motorized connectivity to facilities within 10 years. So those were focused on projects that needed to meet compliance. Were not ADA accessible, and we needed to address the condition of them, the capacity of that park, the cost. Obviously, as we spread out, we can't do all of these things at one time. And then also the community input associated with the park plan to kind of drive that discussion. So when we go to the next slide, I know in the presentation that I sent out, these numbers had gotten mixed up. And so I highlighted them because this presentation shows different numbers than what you received previously. These are the 3 numbers that were not accurate. So we have the first item, which is the evaluation and repair of the Riverwalk Trail. This is something that was very clear in the parks plan. It's a highly used asset. And we've received a lot of complaints and concerns about some of the routes and things like that, creating areas where people have tripped and fallen on the trail. So this is meant to be money set aside to evaluate the trail and correct those areas where they've deteriorated and make them accessible when it comes to, wheelchair and things like that. The next item is the Lee Austin Park improvement. This is the design and plan for that. We did move that out of the current fiscal year because it was unlikely it was going to be completed this spring. And so we knew that was something we needed to move forward to a future year. And then in every year, we have put a quadrant of the city in there to address sidewalk replacement. That doesn't mean we're going to address every sidewalk issue in that quadrant, but the goal is to really target a quadrant outside of street construction that really needs sidewalk repair and replacement, because we were identifying that a lot of areas were maybe getting missed because we weren't targeting a region and really trying to tackle that, and then bidding it out as a more broader project that allowed us for cost savings as well. And then the Raynor Park improvements, phase 1 construction. This is really focused on the replacement of the current playground structure and any additional items that we believe are critical to that phase 1 of the Raynor Park plan. Now, this plan has not been developed yet, the master plan, the site plan. That's something that we're just launching this spring. So this is likely going to be a project that is under construction the following, still in the same fiscal year, but next spring would be ready and teed up to go. So this just gives kind of a summary of those 2 parks that we're focused on in the next year. And then one of the projects that we moved out further was the Hayhill Riverwalk trail signage. We determined that what was most essential was focusing on the repairs of the trail, as well as the plans for the 2 parks that have the most interest as far as getting additional funding and grant funding. So we moved the trail signage off to the next year with hopes of implementing that in that year. We also have a lot of design and plan projects in this year: Bond Park, Griffin Park, and Hayes Park. Now, we know that there's some of the stuff that we can do in-house with our city engineer, and we may not have to bid out for an outside consultant to help us. A lot of this is just creating the site plan, defining any issues that we need to have. Things could be as simple as grading or different things, agreements that we need to do with neighbors or just cleaning up those park areas. All of those are recommendations that are in the park plan and really are driving these plan and designs. We also have in here Jefferson Trailhead improvements, which involves the construction of restroom, shade area, and drinking fountain. This is an area that we get a lot of comments about and a need for some type of area for people that are along the trail. And so this was identified in the park plan as a priority. Again, we have a quadrant of the city focused on for the non-motorized program, and that would be the sidewalk replacement. And the third here is where we put in the signage plan for the DDA and the Historic District Commission. We anticipate this will be funded by the DDA, at least a large portion of it, and they have shifted their dollars this year to do programs related to COVID-19 and assisting businesses with the gift card programs and things like that. So they've pushed this off in order to prioritize those programs. The Bond Park improvements would be in this third year, and then also really focusing on some type of sidewalk construction around the Meyer area. We can see now, and I know Elizabeth has referenced this more than once, but if you're driving in this area, this is the perfect time to see the traffic or the foot traffic pattern, because you can actually see people walking and their footprints in the snow in this area. There's a lot of people that walk to Meyer that I think people would be surprised by the amount of foot traffic that is there in the snow. And so our goal there is to try to identify where we could put sidewalks and make that a little bit more walkable. Is there any questions on parks and cemetery, forestry, and non-motorized?
City manager?
Yeah.
I'm just curious why now I've lost where I was. My computer went wacko. Why would the Kip Road non-motorized not just be part of the quadrant evaluation that it's in, so that it's coordinated together?
I think it probably would be. As far as you're saying is that in that actual quadrant?
Well, I think it is. I think it is in the southwest quadrant of the city, but I'm just curious why we have two different projects.
Yeah, I think we identified it as two separate projects mainly because we wanted I think they would likely be bid together if we moved through that way. This is more just defining that we always want to dedicate a certain level of sidewalk replacement money of existing sidewalk. And I would anticipate that if we're putting a sidewalk in at Meyer, there may be some assessment involved and some other things that would make it a separate project. But we would evaluate that as we got closer.
Okay.
One
And
more question. Sorry.
I just one more, Elaine.
Yeah.
If you move up to what says it's page 23, and there are several examples, I'm just curious what this note at the bottom of the page that says document reference page 27 means. It's in several places and I hadn't had a chance to ask. I hadn't jumped in, but
They should be references to the page that category starts in the actual narrative.
So document reference page 27 is page 27 of what?
Of the actual physical document of the CIP. So when you go to the CIP, that is where parks and forestry starts.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, my question was, we had the cemetery forestry board meeting this afternoon, and the question came up about the second drive to the cemetery and the columbarium. And the second drive is on, it's a little further out. But the question was on the columbarium, has that moved out? That was repurposing the building at the entrance of the cemetery.
So we do not currently have in the CIP repurposing that facility. We did have the immediate repairs to save it, which has been completed,
Right.
tuck pointing and things like that. But that would be something that if the cemetery board thought was a priority, would be something that would need to be added to the plan. It's currently not in the plan.
Right. Thank you. They are completing the actual what there is available in the cemetery. And once that is completed, that will probably come up as a next step. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just confirming that the second drive is in year 5. And so that has been identified in this area as definitely a priority, but that second drive is in year 5.
Right.
Any other questions?
Manager Stewart, I have a question. Can you remind me, I know this subject comes up occasionally, and that is the non-motorized pathway across the Columbia Street Bridge. I know we've talked about the costs of doing studies on that. I know, we've had conversations even as recently with the damage to the bridge. Did we ever have anything in the CIP to look at this on a more long-term basis, or has it really just been sort of a theoretical point of conversation?
Well, we did a feasibility study and we got the cost estimates that were over $1 million to do a pedestrian bridge, which would be required because we can't add any area to the existing bridge because of the weight limitations. And because of the funding that they use to repair that bridge or replace it or whatever that last construction was, I believe they still have 20 years before they can do any additions to it. And so the challenge where we felt like we got some movement from MDOT more recently was that they were willing to consider a protected sidewalk across the bridge, which was the most financially feasible thing for us to do. And so that's the direction we're headed at this point, is to trying to get that approval and know that there is going to be costs associated with that, because MDOT is not going to pay for us to get the approach set and all of those things that we need to do. That still will be a costly project, but we hope to have, once we do the design work, understand what that cost is and then put it into the CIP as a next step, but also get the approval from MDOT that they would accept that.
And so just to clarify, the analysis and evaluation and even approval from MDOT would come before we seek to put it in as a specific project in the CIP.
I think for that particular option. Now, if you were interested in pursuing an option of a pedestrian separate bridge across the highway, which has its own issues and costs and approvals and things like that, that would be something that I would view as separate from what staff is proposing, which is the protected walkway across the bridge.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yep. Okay, we're gonna move to motor vehicle pool. So this is a fund that I feel like the CIP has really served us well as getting into a routine of regular replacement of our vehicles and really staying on top of that to the point where, you know, our staff has done a ton of work, particularly Kirk Crawford, and really understanding where is that point where we're spending more on maintenance than we should be, and we need to be shifting out our equipment. And so there are rules related to, you know, safety of vehicles and life of vehicles and things like that we're basing a lot of these on, but it's also real world experience of what our team is experiencing of how often are we sending things out for maintenance versus when we could get some value from them. So what has changed since the document you have received is as late as last week, we got some updated numbers on vehicle costs. And a lot of these costs have increased based on supply and production, a lot of it related to COVID-19. And so cost of our vehicles we know are going up and are increasing. And so we wanted to make sure that was captured because it does impact each year. And we know, I mean, we can't predict if that will get more under control, but we would expect there would be a regular increase over time anyway. So we wanted to make sure we articulated the most recent numbers we got when it came to vehicle costs. So all of these are replacements. Our police vehicles, as you may be familiar, we have shifted to replace with an Explorer. And so these are not like replacements because they currently are not Explorers, but they will be shifting so that we have a fleet of Explorers versus the current vehicles we have. As you may be aware, they discontinued the vehicles that we currently purchase, and we had to evaluate between a couple other vehicles, and they were all comparable cost, but we evaluated the fact that, you know, when we have a Charger or a Mustang or things like that, is that the best feel or look for a small community where we aren't going to be in situations where our police officers are in high-speed chases or anything like that. And we also evaluated the actual room of the vehicles. If you've been in any of our current vehicles, which I've done ride-alongs, it is very tight for our officers and their equipment and all of those things. And we have found that the Explorer is the best fit and it's comparable in cost. So these are regular replacements and keeping us on track of that maintenance. And then as you go through the next year, again, nothing has changed as far as the order and priority. And the main reason for that is we did a lot of work in really spreading out the costs. And so these large equipment replacements, we're spreading them out in a way that makes it feasible for this fund to be sustainable. That's one of the things I'm most proud of when it comes to the CIP, is that it's really allowing us to see the trends and where our costs, where maybe have a large project that we need to plan for it or a large replacement. So nothing has changed in this category, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, we will move on to building, property, and equipment. So a lot of our building, property, and equipment, this is definitely a category that has a lot more, I guess I would say, flexibility when it comes to oversight of regulations and things like that. A lot of our other categories are driven by regulatory requirements, but our building, property, and equipment is driven by the fact that we should be meeting all the ADA requirements. We do have some occupational safety requirements and things like that. But generally, some of these items can be prioritized in different ways. The main focus of this category that you're going to see is about regular maintenance and making sure that our buildings do not fall into disrepair. So the first item is the library project. What has changed in this project, as it's kind of evolved, is that we shifted from, if you remember, you know what, actually I have some slides on this. So I'm going to go through these and then we'll come back to the library project so we can talk about that in more detail. One of the corrections that we did make was that there was an error in the number. The estimated cost is actually $225,000. I believe it was listed as $325 in the version you originally received. So that has been updated. The other items on this first sheet in the first year are parking lot improvements for City Hall, the fire station, replacement of the furnace and AC in the office area and training room, a commercial washing machine for Station 1. They already have replaced the dryer, but this is the second, they were combined in a previous fiscal year, and then we split them due to COVID. And then a replacement of the rescue boat, as well as a sprinkler system for the truck bay of the fire station. The rear approach of the fire station will be part of the same project as the building lot, parking lot repairs for City Hall. Those are all items that are going to be, those will be coordinated and bid out together. So when we talk about the library, I just want to kind of back up to how we got to where we are today. In 2019, we did a feasibility study, and that confirmed that the community wanted the library downtown and that it could meet the future needs for Cattle with its existing footprint. We just, but that there were renovations required. City Council authorized up to $550,000 in fiscal year 19-20 budget, with a goal of 50% being funded by other entities to fund phase 1 of the project. Phase 1 was defined as addressing contractual obligations with Cattle, also providing ADA required accessibility to the building in the first floor, and to improve the entire first floor for a long-term, no matter who the tenant was. So any tenant customization would be the responsibility of the library, but we would build and renovate it in a way that any tenant could come in and it would be meeting it would meet the requirements that they would need. So this was the layout of that first floor. For those of you, and some of this has been tweaked a little bit, but generally you see a reorientation of the children's area, making ADA accessible bathrooms, one bathroom that would actually be open to an exterior door, so that there's potential that it could be open in the evening or for events without the library having to be open. So what happened in 2020? We hope to move forward with the project, but obviously COVID impacted that. We were able to complete the design of phase 1, and we also moved forward with an application for funding for a grant, a $100,000 grant from SHPO. What we learned in that process was that we could potentially split phase 1 into 2 parts and be eligible for an additional grant from SHPO in a year or 2. And so what we made the decision to do was split the project into 2 parts, and phase 1, part 1, which is what you're seeing in the next fiscal year, would include a new entrance, utility upgrades, and 1 interior ADA compliant bathroom. The estimated cost is $225,000. The next part of phase 1 would be part 2, which would be the relocation of the children's area, the creation of the kitchen prep area, a second ADA compliant bathroom, and completing any remaining improvements required for that first floor area. Any tenant customization for the first floor would be provided by the library. So this gives you a breakdown of those costs. We did get a preliminary notice of intent from SHPO that we did receive $90,000 in the grant. There's not been an official announcement. We still have some work we have to do to get all the paperwork, but we have met our goal in order to move forward with that part 1, phase 1. And so we're pretty excited about that. And we're hoping to start that, right after the start of the fiscal year.
City manager?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Now you divided part 1 into 2 parts.
Yes.
Phase 1 into 2 parts. Is there a phase 2?
There is a phase 2, but if you remember when we talked about this as a council, there wasn't a lot of interest in phase 2 being a priority right now. And so it was really just the direction to staff was focus on getting phase 1 done. Phase 1 is the minimum requirements we need for that building to meet the contractual requirements as well as the ADA accessibility. Phase 2 involved an elevator and basement renovation. And those were things that the library it's not required to have right now. Obviously, they would like to have it to expand their space, but it's not required for them to meet the needs of the community. So our focus is only on phase 1 right now.
So if I remember correctly, our total cap on our project was going to be $275,000 for phase 1. This looks like 500,000.
Well, what has to go in the CIP is the total project cost, but we understood that the total project cost would be, we were very clear that the council wanted us to try to raise half of those costs. And so we're doing our due diligence on that. There may be a time where we have to come to council and say, we've only been able to raise 40%. Do you still want to move forward? But right now, I think we're on track with that part 1, phase 1, where we've raised 90,000 in grant funds to move forward with that. So we're still under the commitment of what the city wanted to contribute.
So phase 1, part 1 is 225,000 plus 90? Or
No,
225,000?
it's a total cost of 225, but we believe we will be able to secure a grant for 90,000 of that.
So we'll be on the hook for 135,000.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
City manager.
Yeah.
And forgive me because it's been a year.
Yeah.
Has the deed been cleared? Have the deed restrictions been cleared on the building itself?
Yeah, so the short answer is not yet, but I want to give a little more information. So we have not spent any energy on clearing the deed restriction because we weren't sure we were going to get any funding, and we knew we weren't going to move forward if we didn't get grant support for the project. So we did get the indication of the initial NOI in the last week. Actually, it might be a week and a half now. And so we've started those conversations. We've already drafted the quick claim deed. We've talked with the county. They're supportive of clearing the deed from them, the title work from them. We've met with the school district. They're generally supportive. They have to take it before their board, but they've asked us to present March 1st. And we also have to have Vive sign off on a quick claim deed. And I actually have a meeting with him tomorrow to discuss the process that he would like that to go forward with their township board. So we don't anticipate entering into any construction contracts or award of bids until the deed is cleared and the title is clear. So we don't have any of those restrictions.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions on that project? Okay, so this slide still continues the current fiscal year, this coming fiscal year starting July 1. It will include a police interview recording system, the master plan, phase 3. I am going to be honest, I'm not sure we're going to be ready for phase 3 within next fiscal years, but it would be shortly after if it wasn't. Phase 3 is a specific focus on ordinance changes based on the master plan and what wasn't accomplished in that first phase. So really looking at, are there any ordinances that we need to fix? Part of what we're asking for in the RFP, or we hope as we work through you guys, is one of the things staff is asking for is an audit of our ordinances after the master plan is to complete, with recommendations of which ones need to be evaluated and changed. This would be money set aside to do that. And so we don't know, we hope we're going to be ready for that. But considering the master plan is going to be starting this summer, that may be aggressive to know that we're going to be ready at that time. Rental space furniture replacement is just regular replacement of our furniture. And that may be something that we're likely going to delay until spring of next year to kind of evaluate where we are with rentals. We haven't rented out the facility during COVID-19, so this may be a lower priority as we move forward. City Hall renovations. We really had a lot of discussion internally about City Hall renovations. As you remember, we had phase 1 really focusing on our first floor customer service desk, our city clerk's area, and really developing that floor a little bit differently now that we know how we're using it. We were gonna push this off because of, knowing that's a lower priority. However, with COVID-19, it's really created some different complications that we weren't anticipating. And I'm really glad we didn't make these improvements prior, because there's some things we need to do, from staff separation and different workspaces. Shared workspaces are a little more challenging, and we just want to keep that in mind. So we have kept this in here. And from a staff perspective, we still believe it's a priority. We do have the clerk's upgrade to Laserfish. We have an outdated system right now. This is what tracks all of our documents and scans them in. It's not supported, the system we have right now, so we need to move forward with that upgrade. And then the public works facility construction. As I mentioned, we're in the focus of design right now for DPW in the current fiscal year, but we need to move forward with construction in the next fiscal year, because that will be what allows us to move forward with the wastewater treatment plant. So these are just some pictures of the wastewater treatment, or the DPW facility. As you can see, it's a building that's past its life. I really think they've gotten everything they can out of it. I know sometimes there's discussion about, did we just not invest and maintain the building the way that it should? I don't believe that's the case. I think the building really has passed its lifespan. But the other area that I want to make sure we emphasize is these pictures here, where we focus on, this is an area that's flooding, and it does provide some access issues to our vehicles and things like that. And so there's some combination of issues happening here that we really think reusing the site and shifting the DPW facility closer to the water treatment plant will be a better long-term solution. So year 2 under building, property, and equipment, again, includes some regular items of maintenance and just keeping up on our facilities so that they don't deteriorate. We do have 2 planning studies, sub-area plans, that we pushed out just from a capacity perspective. But I did want to note that we did apply for funding for the Kip Road Temple Street sub-area plan, and we believe we may get funding for that. And if that's the case, that would move up into next fiscal year, because we would have it primarily funded by an outside source. We also have some upgrades to the patrol cars and really making some investments in GIS. GIS has the ability to really help us streamline and create efficiencies. Also, we're under a lot of pressure when it comes to how we're tracking our assets, especially infrastructure. And we know that the GIS upgrades and investments can really help us in doing that more effectively. And then you'll see in year 3, we have continuation of phase 1, but part 2 of the library. This is what we talked about, that 2 separation. At that time, we would again apply for more grant funds and hopefully secure more funding towards that project. And then additional investment in GIS and additional layers, and making sure that we're starting to do asset inventories to fill in those gaps of data sets. As well as, this is the year that we're proposing a small carport for our police units. Right now is a perfect example of when we have snow. Our units are not covered. And so there is a little bit of a delay in response. It also is harder on our equipment to not have them covered. These wouldn't be enclosed garages. It would just be a carport for a few of our vehicles. Are there any questions on parks and building and equipment?
City Manager?
Yes.
A question on, do you anticipate there needing to be coordination or connection between the Kip Road Temple Street sub-area plan as well as the Kip Road Temple Street, well, it'll be more Kip Road sidewalk plan, and the sidewalk plans for the various quadrants of the cities that might overlap those areas? I realize Kip Temple is kind of a ways away from that, but you're also talking about a Cedar Street plan and all that. Are we going to have overlap on these things so we don't do redundancies, like redo things year over year? Or am I just not reading them right? In which case I'll shut up.
No, you are reading them correctly. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to see how they're falling, because I believe they actually fall in the same year, so that we would be doing the plan and then making the improvements in the same year.
Okay.
But we may actually get funding for the Kip Road sooner So we would be doing the plan first and then making the improvements in year 3. So either way, they will be coordinated.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions? All right, what are our next steps, Deb?
Let me try again. I'm trying. It's going crazy on me. Okay, so when we talk about next steps, again, where we are now, we are now in the area of red, which is staff clarification and corrections. So any clarifications that you think you need to help you make a decision at the next step, staff is open to getting those. If you want to send those to me, we can prepare any responses and get those to you before your commission meeting or your council meeting. The goal here is to have you have enough information where you can make an informed decision to have this be a real plan. We don't want this to be a plan that sits on a shelf. We want it to be something that's referred to in the budget process, and that, you know, the best situation for me is when we have council members say, we should put that in the CIP, because that shows me that you guys are really seeing the value of the document. And from a staff perspective, it really provides us a roadmap to be able to see trends and what are what's coming up in the future and how we plan for that more effectively. I think a great example is the fire equipment fund. We could go along and buy a fire truck when we need one and not have a plan for it, or we can set aside money seeing that a big purchase is coming so that we're not taking out debt for that fire truck. That's the goal we're having with these plans, these long-term replacement plans. And there's really not that much that should be that surprising to us as a municipality. So our focus is to try to keep refining it. We know that we still could make this plan better. We know that there's more things we could add to it. We're already talking about maybe even some tweaks so that you can see some different information. But if there's things that you're like, hey, I really need to know this to help make a more informed decision, we want to know. So the next step is for the Planning Commission to consider it at their March meeting, so that if they do have changes or ideas of different priorities or projects that they would like evaluated or considered, that they make that decision there and recommend something to council. And then the council would have a similar discussion about the priorities that they would like to see tweaked or change. And then that would drive the budget process. Are there any questions when it comes to process or next steps, or anything that you would like to see some more clarification on before your next meetings?
Hey, Deb.
Yeah.
So first of all, super good presentation. I also like this time of year. I was thinking how this is actually the first year that we've been able to, after our master plan meeting coming up, we'll be taking all feasibility studies, our water study, Parks and Rec study, like everything is going to make sense this year and put all of these safeguards that everyone has worked so hard to bring us to this point. So that really pleases me to see this come out this year. Understanding that this is not the meeting to discuss budget items, knowing that the next process goes to the Planning Commission, I do think it's fair to ask them to consider, like you said, rental equipment for City Hall might not be a priority. I don't know much either about the boat situation. I know the Firefighter Association bought that on their own. I don't know if there's a reason, you know, that things like we could hold off because of unknown expenses, and we are kind of coming out of last year with COVID. I was happy. Let me see. Other than that, it's hard to discuss because this meeting is important, but it's also contingent on the budget, right? So like, I'm supportive of the library when that was a huge meeting just a few short years ago where it was promised we'd only spend a certain amount. And then to see phase 2, which is not on this CIP, but that's 850,000. So it's kind of like if we're agreeing to phase 1, we're already priming ourselves to adopt the idea that we will be doing phase 2.
Councilmember Vogel,
Yeah.
everything you're saying is great, but this isn't the right meeting.
Well,
Okay.
that's what because
This
it goes to planning, but if they need to consider,
But that's up to them to consider. The plan, the way this is supposed to work, and I was gonna make sure this was clarified, is
Yeah.
Deb is gonna bring a final proposal from the staff to the planning commission. It's gonna be this proposal with some tweaks, because she's already noted some things that were mistakes that need to be updated. The planning commission then will own it. And the planning commission will take ownership of it when they approve it. And they may make changes to it or whatever, but whatever they adopt will become the new proposed CIP plan. That will then go to the city council. And the city council will get to do the same thing the planning commission got to do. And that is we'll get to talk about it and the discussions that you've kind of started bringing up, prioritizing. Should we do this? Should we do that? Should we not do this? Should we change the number? Should we recombine phases? Whatnot, blah, 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 blah. And then when we as a council adopt it, it will become the final plan, and that will then feed the budget. So the budget will then come after that. So there's no,
But there's never an opportunity where I'm sitting with our planning commissioners where
No.
they could even ask us what we think are priorities.
that's not
Because
how,
everything on the CIP looks fantastic. They might as well just say, yes, let's approve everything without seeing the considerations that we have to make on council
But-
because of funding.
but Deb, that's.
Mr. Mayor,
So,
that's
so I don't know. It's hard. Like I hear you, but
Well,
it's
you don't-
also like it all matters on budget.
Councilmember Vogel, please, you don't hear me. The planning commission and the city council have two different roles. The planning commission is going to look at this from a planning perspective only. The council will look at it from a planning perspective, but also the budget perspective. And so the planning commission has a totally different role than the city council does in this process. They are supposed to look at this from a planning perspective, and they're the ones that are supposed to relate it the most to things like the master plan, the parks plan, the whatever other plan we have that's governing things. So this is the formal time for interaction just to understand the plan. But there is no interdebate between the council and the planning commission on priorities. The planning commission gives their priorities based on their concerns for planning. And then the council will give the final, will develop the final plan based on all considerations, which is planning and budget and staffing and all of that stuff. Okay?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
So, and I guess I'll put this out there that if Member Vogel would like to join us, we will have a public hearing on this. And at that point, you are absolutely welcome to come and discuss any part of this with the planning commission. And that's where you can, come in and bring your topics and your concerns or whatever that you may have. So I invite you to the planning commission.
Thank you, Sabaton. Very sweet.
All right. Any other questions for the city manager? All right, Deb, is that it?
That is all I have.
All righty then. I guess this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for taking your time to do this. This is one of the most important things that the city does, and it's one of the best projects that Deb has ever embarked on, and it's still a work in progress, but I think it's really close to being about as good as it can be. So Planning Commission, do your thing. Don't hesitate to speak your piece, because you get your one shot at it, and then the council's going to do the same thing. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks.